Okay, Harriet, why don't you start, my dear?
Well, I want to welcome you all. It's a pleasure to see all of you again and to see several new faces. Uh, since we had spaces on the keyboard, what happened here?
You spotlighted.
I just spotlighted you. It's okay, Harriet.
I want to see everybody, so don't spotlight me. Thank you.
Okay.
Uh, so at any rate, we invited some new people to join us, and I want to welcome them. It's a pleasure, I'm sure, to have them, and I hope that they participate along with everybody else. Last week, we really went through an analysis through your own Jewish experiences. We were able to examine most of the elements of a very rich and diverse Jewish civilization. Today, we're going to divide our sessions into three parts as we continue to look at Kaplan's definition of Judaism as an evolving religious civilization. We'll start with an examination of Brandeis sociologist Bernard Griesman's survey through the lens of evolution, the evolving religious civilization. Our second part will be related to religion and God, and our last half hour will be devoted to those lines from the next book, What We Mean by Religion, that you found particularly relevant or perplexing. So let's start with the first section. Reisman's survey was formulated in 1979, 26 years after the 1953 edition of Ira's Creative Judaism that we are reading. We are now living about 70 years since the publication of Ira's Creative Judaism and 45 years since the publication of the survey. It's amazing how it doesn't feel that way to me when I look at the dates. Looking through this lens of an evolving civilization, what items would you delete and why? If you all look down at that's why we asked you to download your surveys so that you could see the surveys while we could still see you. What items do you think should be deleted and why? And what new questions might you add? As you look at the items in the survey, do they have the same meaning that they had 45 years ago? Or has the focus changed? What sociological trends do these changes reflect? Do the changes reflect external or internal influences? So with that introduction, you're on.
I see Carol's hand.
Okay, so I had a problem with his categories, and I found it really hard to answer the questions because I thought desirable should be desirable but not essential, and then essential not to do. Maybe not essential would have been better, but I found the categories not desirable. I had a problem with the categories to begin with.
All right, we're not.
I know we're not doing that, but it was.
We're really not dealing with the categories. What we're trying to do is to look at this as in 1979, these were the categories that he thought were important to determine your Jewish identity. And what we're looking at now is the question of, have we evolved? Where have we evolved? Kaplan defined Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. Well, we talked about civilization last time, but we didn't talk about the evolving nature of civilization. So, and later today, we're going to be talking about the religion part. So what we want you to do, what we hope you'll do is look at the categories, think about what's represented. Are they still relevant today? Would you change them? And why? Myrna. Myrna and then Judy.
Myrna, you have to unmute yourself, dear.
Well, okay. And I screwed up the video part.
If you press the video, so we have the video. And
I have it, but I actually we'll go
yeah.
back. I actually thought it was very interesting, this survey, but I only found 3 categories or items essential. Number 1, accept being a Jew and not try to hide it. And everything that I thought about is influenced by October 7th. I can't get that away. That has made my life different, and I think it should have made every Jewish life different. And the other one was essential support. I don't like the word all, but humanitarian causes. And finally, lead an ethical and moral life. Those are the 3 essentials of being a Jew. And I can't, most of the things are desirable or makes no difference, but desirable is not essential. And leading an ethical and moral life and identifying as a Jew openly makes you a Jew. That's
and
my feeling.
Those are the things that you think are important and have not changed or have changed.
Well, you're going to laugh, but I grew up Orthodox, moved into Reform, and wound up conservative and going into Reconstruction. So I've been in all of it except Hasidism. That's, but I don't know whether I can say it's changed, because these were always the principles my father and mother talked about when they talked about not gefilte fish, they talked about a ethical life. And actually, they didn't talk as much as live. Their choices were ethical choices. Their empathy, their willingness to do for others, those were what defined them. But of course, the schmaltz part of it was wonderful. The Seders, my grandparents, and all of that, and the Hanukkah, the whole thing. But what made my father and mother would say, what makes you Jewish, first of all, identify openly. And secondly, your choices in life, the ethical and moral choices. The rest is desirable, but not necessary.
Okay, so what you're suggesting is that these are the rock bottom principles of Judaism, and that they have not changed.
Right.
I think Judy had her hand up, and after Judy, Richard.
Well, I looked at this very literally, so I just wanted to delete a lot of the questions because I didn't think that they would make a good Jew. Like number 14, have mostly Jewish friends. I would certainly delete that. Promote the use of Yiddish. That certainly is not one of the things that will make a good Jew. Gain respect of Christian neighbors. I don't know why that was even included. I would delete give Jewish candidates, vote for Jewish candidates, be a liberal, or
yes on that.
I would delete that. Not to vote for a person that's Jewish just because he's Jewish, not because of his qualifications. You vote for a person because of qualifications. Number 16, that was 16. Number 21, I'm going to skip that for now. I would delete marry. marry a person who's Jewish. I don't think if you marry a non-Jew that reflects upon your Judaism. Number 23, belief in God. Well, what is God? The definition of God? I would delete that question because it's too complex for a questionnaire. I would add certain things like, would you send your children to synagogue school? Would you support youth groups and Jewish youth groups and camps? I think that would be an important thing in a questionnaire. So that was my take on this on this questionnaire. There were certain things that were very, very, very outdated. The ones that I noted that should be deleted.
All right. So you think, for instance, on the question of intermarriage, of marrying Jews, it has the view in Judaism generally, has that been a change? Is that a change? Do you think that 50 years ago, people would have been as casual about intermarriage?
No, not at all.
So is that a good evolution? I'm opening it up. Is that a good evolution? What is within that evolution? What would you, how would you think about it?
I see Linda or Beth with the hand up. I don't know whether that's in response to this question.
Yeah, I don't think there's as much wrong with intermarriage as there was 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, a person who intermarried would probably be rejected by friends and family and might be excluded from the community, but that doesn't happen today. And I think intermarriage is maybe the wrong term, and even like interfaith isn't really a good term. What it usually means is a Jewish person marries a non-Jewish person of no religion, and they raise Jewish children. That's what it means in our synagogue anyway. That's what I see all over. And so I don't think it means what it meant 50 years ago. And I think in our community, it's often the non-Jewish parent that drives kids to programs and stuff. So the concept has changed from 50 years ago.
Okay, so that this is an evolution, and in a sense, it's an evolution that looks at intermarriage as perhaps providing an opportunity rather than as a total negative. So that's a major shift. I think, Richard, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, well, first of all, the accepting being a Jew and not trying to hide it, it's according to when you are. The age you're in. My mother-in-law, who was kosher and brought Roberta up to be Jewish, grew up in an era where she had to change her name from Sadie to Shirley because Sadie was too Jewish and she couldn't get a job. We later found out that we never knew her name was Sadie until Matt and Deb named our granddaughter Sadie, and Roberta was told by a cousin that she had done some research and that Shirley was really Sadie originally. So that one, and now again with the anti-Semitism, in certain cases you might have to be careful of who you say you're Jewish to. We live in New York, so it's easy, but with anti-Semitism, that might be coming along. I felt that support of Israel was important because and that doesn't mean we have to support the government of Israel and everything they do, but then we don't always support the government of the United States and love everything they do. But that's our, in my mind, safeguard. that's the one place that if we support it, that's the one place someone might have to go to someday. We also feel that it's very important to belong to a synagogue or a temple. Even though we don't go to services all the time, it's important to support the temple, to belong to one. And we have, since we're married, we belong to synagogues. Definitely to lead an ethical and moral life. I think it's important to know the fundamentals of Judaism. I happen to know someone who said when applying to rabbinical college that he didn't believe in God or she didn't believe in God. So I don't think that's an important one. You have to believe in the Jewish people and the Jewish religion. That's and there are a lot of others that are desirable, and that's it.
I see, thanks, Richard. I see Lynn and I see Jane, and I saw someone else that has disappeared.
Wait, hello.
And Joan. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Sorry. Just thought I'd throw it in.
No. I'm glad because I know I saw you, Joan, but I didn't remember exactly because you.
That's okay. That's okay.
And that, Lynn?
So a lot of them have been covered, and I guess I read it a little differently. And so I didn't take very much off because I guess maybe that I not sure how I would answer the question of what does it mean to be good, to be a good Jew. Like that's what I kept thinking as I read through them. Like, could this question inform somebody's judgment of a good Jew? So the only ones I took off were belief in God and promote the use of Yiddish. And I mean Yiddish just because I think it's it's sort of too late now for that to be a basis for a judgment. And belief in God, I feel like is not. Judaism allows for kind of a broad understanding of that. And maybe I actually not even sure I would take it off because I guess, it sort of depends on what you mean by that. But I think like Judy said, it's such a big question that I'm not sure how much it would help you define somebody as being a good Jew. I guess, but I the ones that came more easily, sort of the big one that I thought was missing that I was surprised given what else was on the list, besides the ones that Judy mentioned, like sending your children to religious school, having a bar mitzvah, b'nai mitzvah. I thought the big one was observing Shabbat. I was surprised that wasn't on there. And I guess I just want to add that it doesn't, I don't do most of these things. So a lot of the things on the list. So I wasn't answering it sort of personally to say like, am I a good Jew? I was more thinking like, would somebody make a judgment about you as a Jew? Would these questions possibly inform that answer?
We really are trying to look at the evolution of how Jews would view these things 50 years ago and now. So you're really suggesting that 50 years ago, Yiddish might have been much more important and many more people may have spoken it,
right,
and read it and seen it as a factor in their lives. And today, Yiddish has not faded away. There's interest in Yiddish, and some young people are trying to revive it. And we have that beautiful Yiddish center in Massachusetts, but there has been an evolution.
Yeah, that was the biggest one. I feel like that sort of time has passed that one. The others, I felt like they still have some relevance. Whether or not I, would pick them or meet that criteria, I thought they could still have relevance.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I see Jane and and then Joan, and then Caitlin.
Yeah, I agreed with Myrna about the ones I chose the three that she did, and also gain the respect of Christian neighbors. I think by the works that one does, and I think we live in a mixed society, and I think that's important. And the belief in God, I think it's phrased in a way that is presumptive. And you know, we are all about a different way of understanding godliness. And I don't think the question lends itself to any kind of subtlety or interpretation. So not because the other behaviors indicate, you know, if you explore it, indicate an understanding of godliness as exemplified by the behaviors that you could check. So
Thanks, Jane. I think that Joan is next.
Right.
I had a problem with the existence of, am I muted? Am I okay?
Oh, you're fine, we hear you.
Okay. I had a problem with the existence of the questionnaire itself because, and I'll explain what I mean by that. What I mean by that is how it's used, or how was it used when it was designed. 50 years ago, I was an educator. I became a rabbi later, but I started it as an educator. And so I would find a document like this judgmental and potentially a great turnoff to people who I would be trying to encourage to lead a Jewish life. It would be one thing to use a document like this to do what we're doing now, which is, I'm hearing interference. Is anyone else hearing that? I'm hearing a lot of interference. It would be one thing to use a document like this for educational purposes, and that's true 50 years ago, and that's true now. For discussions such as we're having right now. And yes, some of the things in this document would be viewed differently 50 years ago or 40 years ago than they are now. For example, the question of intermarriage. My parents were intermarried. What did that mean? My mother came from an extremely reformed family, and my grandfather came from a very traditional family. So for both sides of the family, that was considered a form of intermarriage. And what ended up happening, fortunately for me, is both sides believe very strongly in family. And so they came to love each other and they accommodated each other. And that meant that my mother's side would have paper plates and get whatever was needed for my father's side, and my father's side would do other things. But we even vacationed together sometimes, and we learned to accommodate. Maybe that's how I became a Reconstructionist. I don't know, but not really. But so my goal would have been, and would it be now, for a discussion sort of like what we're having right now. What does this mean? What is it in your eyes? What does intermarriage mean, for example, in your eyes? I would have seen those questions differently, by the way. My answers would be different now than they were back then. And that's true about a lot of things, whether gay life or, you know, LGBTQ or use of language. You know, I've evolved in various ways. But this, I'm afraid that if people were just handed a document like this, and they were asked to answer a document like this, they'd be afraid to give genuine answers. They would be afraid of being judged. And that's really my general response to this document. I have responses to individual questions, but I want to give that general response. You know, if it's used as an educational tool, that's fine, but that's it.
I should say, and again, the source is called The Jewish Experiential Book, The Quest for Jewish Identity. And Dr. Reisman did use it for synagogue groups. This was not, this was this was supposed to, and it's one of the entire book are exercises that would be used at synagogue retreats where we used it for the first time in the life. So
I
certainly
recognize that, Lee, but my question would be this. Who is training the person who is doing the discussions? Because I think that's critical, is who and how are they trained? So yes, I get that. I do. But it has to be more in my view.
Right.
I think that Caitlin is next.
And I think then we need to.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Caitlin.
Yeah, hi. You know, this list is so, not only is it so striking for me as somebody who's not even yet 30, but it's also difficult because I don't necessarily equate a particular political affiliation or a particular halachic affiliation with being a good Jew. And so a lot of these I would probably take off the list. And then on the other hand, for example, something like number 19, I feel like it's not broad enough in our contemporary age. Because nowadays we wouldn't necessarily talk about, I mean, we do talk a lot about working for equality for African Americans and Black populations in general, but we usually just talk about intersectionality. We usually just talk about making our spaces more just in general, and we're more conscientious of the fact that, you know, African Americans aren't the only people of color that we share spaces with, and that Jews share spaces with people that are not just either Christian or Black, that there are people beyond that we share spaces with. And that's why we have interfaith gatherings. That's why we have so many mixed families. And that it's not just a question of binaries or polarities, that we're thinking about all these different modalities that a person's family could be or a person's individual identity could be. And
All right.
yep.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay. And similarly, number 16 for me is kind of troublesome because there are still communities that have a very strong precedent for voting for Jewish candidates or feel like having a Jewish-led state is really important, and I can understand why they might feel that way. But at the same time, I've also seen some of the results of states that are led by Jewish people that are making decisions that they feel are grounded in our values that are not necessarily giving us the best outcomes. So, for example, when the state of Israel has debates on the rights of women or the rights of liberal Jews, that's an example of a Jewish-led state that makes questionable decisions for Jews. We're not even talking necessarily about non-Jewish people at that point. We're talking about Jewish people making decisions about other Jewish people and questioning who is in and who is out of the group.
Oh, thanks, Caitlin. I see. I see. I don't know whether it's Laura or Beth, and then Bob. So yes, please.
I think that we need just very short comments because I'm looking at the time and it's running away. And the last thing on this column is God. And I think that, Lee, you were going to do some talking about that. So
I decided not to talk at all about God because no one cares about God. No, but I think we should finish this up, and then I'll talk about God. Yeah, please. So please.
on.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, really, things like religious observance, there's a lot of points there in the numbered list about religious observance or things like that. It's I don't think that's essential to being a good Jew, but I think maybe I would group that all into maybe something like having knowledge of it, like learning about about the religious aspects, about cultural aspects of different Jewish languages. I mean, yeah, I happen to be a big Yiddishist, but yeah, there are other languages, as my wife pointed out. So, just to have some kind of knowledge of a lot of these things, even if you don't necessarily choose to practice, like going to synagogue every week or keeping kosher or whatever, but to have a knowledge and appreciation of it and understand like where all that came from, I think is important. I think the most important thing is to lead a moral and ethical life, and not just to impress or I remember the words, our Christian neighbors, like just basically that we should be moral and ethical people, and for that everybody can see that, not just our Christian neighbors, but that everyone can see that. And I think it's also essential, to be proud and identify yourself openly. I think those are probably the two most important things, and the rest of it is, can be combined together. But yeah, it's true. I think a lot of this is also somewhat outdated, maybe need to be worded differently.
I think there was one other person, Lee.
Yeah, Bob.
Thank you. Bob.
Well, I remember the first time I saw this, and I had to like come up with some activities for my first Hillel job in rabbinical school. And so I found this book in New York and quickly tried to find things to do. I remember seeing this, and I had the reaction then that I have now, which is to scratch off the title, which says A Good Jew. And the whole idea that there are good Jews and bad Jews, I mean, there's all of a sudden this discussion of who's a good Jew or who's a bad Jew based on attitudes toward political attitudes and so on and so forth, attitude towards Israel and so on and so forth. I would replace it with an engaged Jew. And the list is very kind of descriptive, I think maybe of like a conservative synagogue in Baldwin, Long Island in 1975. You do the following list of things and then you're a good Jew, like hooray. First, when I think about Kaplan and Eisenstein, like their assumption was that Judaism was self-justifying, that you didn't have to like check off, do something to justify being Jewish. That's one reaction I had to it. And I guess like I don't think we're as concerned right now about all the particulars because different people have different ways of putting together what they may experience as a rich, meaningful, and sustainable Jewish life, and they may look different from each other. I have friends who are Yiddishists and wouldn't step into a synagogue in a zillion years, and I have friends who wouldn't step into a room with a speaking Yiddish. But I think that we're just a very pluralistic Jewish world, right? At least in the United States right now, with many, many entry points. And, if I had to check things off, it would be like, are you well informed? Are you familiar with Jewish sources? Do you do collective things with other Jews? Not that you have to justify your existence as a Jew and make sure that it's sort of like it's 11:59, and if you haven't like checked off four of these activities, you turn back into a pumpkin at midnight. That somehow doesn't seem to reflect Jewish life now.
Yeah, I think that if anything shows the evolution of Judaism since 1979, it's this discussion, isn't it, Harriet? That just our attitude about having a questionnaire, thinking that a questionnaire can encompass what it means to kind of like live a Jewish life. I'm also thinking of the enormous number of different entry points that we have today, that are, at least in New York City, that are there for us, to kind of see our way in. And I'm thinking of the internal walls that have been taken apart, since certainly 1953, but certainly since 1979, and the influences, the societal influences that have perhaps, I'm going to use the word, well, adjusted our vision, that have adjusted our vision. And so I think that the reality of evolution, is that Judaism evolves, and it evolves both internally because of internal forces, and also because of external forces, is something that's proven. When I started my rabbinate, and it's almost 50 years ago, it's 1 year short of 50 years ago, the Jewish community looked very, very different. And I looked very, very different. My whole attitude was like, if I could have had a picture of myself now, then I would say, nope, there's something that's really, really very strange here. That can't be, it must be Lance Friedlander, not Lee Friedlander. That's an inside joke. But something radical has happened. So, yes, Bob, I did have more hair. But it is quite something to see this. I think, I feel a need to address number 23, and I think that we have not approached God or religion qua religion yet. I'd like to. I want to begin with a couple of stories. My father died in 1984, and we were living in Forest Hills. And my father was completely. He was not observant in any way. But I decided that I wanted to say Kaddish for him every morning, and we were living just 2 blocks away from Forest Hills Jewish Center. So I decided to join the synagogue for purposes of saying Kaddish. If I was going to use the synagogue every day, every weekday, I thought I should be a member. So I walked across the street. I was a big walker at that time, and my firstborn was almost 2 years old, and we would go for a stroll every morning. And I stopped by the synagogue to get an application. And the application was what one would expect. I listed my occupation as an executive in a small company. I didn't want any favors, and I filled everything out, including the check, until I got to the bottom line, and it said, by signing this document and submitting my check, I proclaim that I am a Jew and that I believe in God. And I went into the same mode that all of you went into, because it's a conservative synagogue, and it was a fairly centrist conservative synagogue. It was Ben Zion Boxer's synagogue, and so I became very, very puzzled. Can I sign this document in good conscience? And so I struggled over it, and I called the synagogue office, and I said, I think I have to talk to someone about my application, because I don't want to falsify my beliefs. and the secretary said, well, tell me what your problem is. And I said, well, I'm not quite sure what the membership committee of the synagogue has in mind about belief in God and all of that. She said, oh, you want to see Mrs. Greenstein? So I said, oh, okay, I'll see Mrs. Greenstein. So I said, can I come by later today? She said, yes, absolutely. So I go into the office, and I say, I'd like to see Mrs. Greenstein. And they said, oh, Mrs. Greenstein is in just one office past this office. And I went in and I said, Mrs. Greenstein, I have this application and I just want to make sure that I can sign it. And Mrs. Greenstein looked up and she had a large adding machine on her desk. And she said, and I said, I don't know whether I can, in good conscience, sign this, attesting my belief in God. And she said, you got your check? I said, I did. She said, it's good enough for the Forest Hills Jewish Center. Mrs. Greenstein turned out to be the bookkeeper. And she took my check and stamped me a member and all of the rest. And I think I said Kaddish there twice that year. That's a different story. That's how to honor one's relatives or one's wonderful father who's not religious. Then we have two children, and you're the daughter of then only two rabbis, now three rabbis, and every night we would say Shema with our younger daughter Ruthie, and when she was three, she actually stopped me and said, Daddy, what does that mean, the Shema? So I translated the Shema and I said, it means, listen, Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. And she said, Daddy, God is one? And I said, yes, sweetheart. She said, and I'm three. By the way, I just put this together. Her daughter happens to go to Trinity in this city for kindergarten, for first grade. So I guess she's still stuck with that three. We'll see how that works out. But her daughter, my granddaughter, came home from a place called Disneyland this week, and I had not seen her. And it was, I saw her on Motzei Shabbos, happened to be in the city for my grandson's Paw Patrol party. You should know from it. And we're riding from a play date that Lainey had. Lainey is now 7 years old. And she, in the car, she said to me, so, Papa, you're a rabbi. I said, indeed, I am, sweetheart. She said, so you know a lot about God. And I said, well, I know something about God. I know what I think about God. And she said, well, in Hebrew school, we learned that God is everywhere. So I said, I think that's fair to say. What am I going to say to a 7-year-old? And she said, so I want to know what part of God's body we're on. I think we're on God's toenail. So I said, so interesting. And why do you think that? And, she kind of looked at me as if to say, because I know it's a stupid thing to say, and I'm looking for your reaction. But I said, well, that's one way of looking at God, but I look at God in a very different way. And she said, how do you look at God? So I said, I don't look at God as a what, as a being. I look at God as a when we experience God. And she said to me, well, I have absolutely no idea what you mean by that. And I said, join the club. Very few people know what I mean by that. But I said, I do believe that God is, that we can feel presence of God when we're with people we love and everything. And she said, yes, I felt it at Disney World. And I said, oh, really, sweetheart? And she said, yes. And I actually thought that maybe Mickey Mouse was God for a while. So, I mean, there you go. And what does any of that? What does any of that mean? It's all contextual, isn't it? I just want to say to one other sort of event. I guess it was about 7 years ago. Members of the congregation thought that we should have a Reconstructionism 101 course for people who'd come into the congregation not so long before. And library was filled that night. I think we had about 45 people for the first session, and I had a big blackboard, and I asked people to list any component that they thought was part of Jewish life or Jewish being. And we had, I would say, 75 different items on the board, including ethical behavior, including sense of humor, including the Holocaust, including the state of Israel, including not the state of Israel. I mean, we had everything you could imagine. And I stood back from the board looking at it after a good 20 minutes of people throwing things at me. And I said, there's one thing that no one has mentioned. And you got it. It was God. There was not one sense of humor. Yes. God? Not on the board. So it's interesting, and I fell over this. This was not a setup. I want to assure you that I will never set you up. But at the beginning of chapter 21 of Creative Judaism, and it's the section on God, and it's called The Development of the Jewish Religion, Ira starts out with the question, and this is page 107. Ira asks the question, and I'm reading it literally, can one be a good Jew if one has no interest whatever in religion? Or can, and further in the paragraph, he says, or can one be a Jew at all for that matter? And again, the concluding sentence, can one be a Jew without professing any religion? And I thought that it was remarkable in just the juxtaposition to Reisman's questionnaire, like that's what's happening here. So I want us to think about it within the context of this historical note. So Harriet and I have been talking about Dr. Kaplan's formulation that Judaism is the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. But what you should know is that his original formulation of that line was that Judaism is the evolving civilization of the Jewish people. Dr. Kaplan did not have religious as a modifier in his first manuscript. And it was only when he gave his manuscript, can you imagine Bob having to kind of review Kaplan's manuscript for Judaism as a civilization? Yes. but he gave his manuscript to one of his students, Robert Gordis, Alav Shalom. Robert Gordis was a very, very important rabbi in the conservative movement. Not only did he have an important pulpit, but he also was a great scholar, a biblical scholar. He was actually a professor at Temple University, the first years of the existence of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. And Gordis took the manuscript and said, Dr. Kaplan, where's religion in your description? And Kaplan added the modifier. So before I want you to think about that, and I want you to think to answer, and I want to take out the qualifier because yes, and it's can one be a Jew if one has no interest whatever in religion? And I guess the question, and many of you have already answered. Well, you answered you can be a Jew and not believe in God. We didn't talk about religion, but do you think that was a good thing or a needed thing for Kaplan to add? That is religious civilization merely than civilization. Did he need that fire?
When you talk about Jews without religion being Jews, what about all of the secular Jews in Israel? Are they only Israelites or are they Jews?
And indeed, what we see something very interesting, including on your niece's kibbutz, that kibbutzim are secular kibbutzim. Famous secular kibbutzim are adding something to their kibbutz life. What is that, Harriet?
They light candles on Friday night. They, they just a little more, maybe say Kiddush.
Do they have a Seder, maybe?
They have a Seder, yes, they do.
They have a Seder too. And do they light a Chanukia?
They do.
Oh, wow. Oh, I see. So these secular kibbutzim are celebrating rituals of Shabbat. They're having Pesach Seders. They're lighting candles. So, what's that about? Is that religion? I saw Jane's hand. I want to give her a chance to say something. Please.
I think that the forms are less important than the kind of values that the kibbutz exemplifies. I remember going years ago to kibbutz Givat Chaim Ehud, and there was a woman there who was selling her. She was brought to Israel by Hadassah's program. I can't remember the name of it during the war. And
I'm just getting my plug. I'm running out of fuel here. Go ahead.
And she was a potter and a designer who sold things to the Smithsonian. I mean, she was just a very gifted artist, and she brought in as much money as the lawnskeeper, and it was so important for her to live this kind of life. And I think that's what. I think it's rather than the forms of the, I mean, it's lovely with the candles and all of that, if it can have meaning for them, but I think it's my concept of godliness is the values and how one leads a life.
I'm sorry.
How one is with one another. I mean, the children's houses, people are taken care of and they take care of one another. And that seems to me the essence of.
Yeah, you skipped over to something, Jane. That's very interesting. That is that all of a sudden we're talking about relationships and things like that. And I'm not sure. I see two hands. I want Bob to speak and then Judy to speak. And then I want to ask you a fundamental question. What is God? What is God? What is religion? Okay, so, but please, Judy, and then I've already forgotten the other person. Bob. Okay, please, Judy.
When I was in Israel in 1973, we were visiting with family, and we said to them, "You don't belong to a synagogue." And they laughed, and they said, "We live in Israel. We don't need to express our Judaism in a synagogue. We live being Jewish every day. When we go to school, we learn the Bible. We celebrate all the holidays. The holidays are our national holidays." So there was no need for them to express their Judaism ritually.
But you understand when you say we celebrate all the holidays, but there's no need for us to express our Judaism ritually.
That's what they said.
Whoever they are, that puzzles me because it's not, well, Bob, please, and then I'll comment further on that. Yeah, please, Bob.
Well, let me go back to the Gordis story. I think Kaplan let himself get bullied, or maybe it was good for sales. And because he probably didn't yet know that he was going to write a book and that his son-in-law was going to write, this one that we're also reading, right? Because, what he meant by religion, or rather when Ira says what we mean by religion, was, I don't know whether it was just a very, very ancient idea or a very modern idea that ritual and life cycle and holidays and so on are just things, objects, things, that are sort of symbolic of values, and they're a way of living together and a way of being, which in the past couple centuries sort of gets shoveled off to this place called the synagogue, where non-religious people wouldn't go. And I think that your question of Harriet about this kind of recent shift of all these Israelis who wouldn't ever step in a synagogue, all of a sudden discovering that we have these inherited moments and gestures and objects and stuff can actually be of value. And maybe on the kibbutz they don't fully understand what they may represent to them. Maybe they will, but certainly Kaplan and Eisenstein did. And they didn't mean what, their teachers thought they meant, and they didn't mean whatever the rabbi of my synagogue in Queens when I was a kid, I have no idea what any of it meant. I don't know that he knew what, just do them because you do them. And I think that was, really a source of such enormous alienation of people who were raised more traditional backgrounds and then sort of disappear or decide, like, people went to RSC of our generation that thought, well, there's got to be some better way to do this, and discovered Kaplan and discovered that it's not about the doing, it's about what the doing represents. And we want to use the word religion for that. Sure, we could use Mickey Mouse to describe that also. That's okay with me too. I mean, just not with Disney, but
Yeah, I see Carol's hand. I guess that what I'm thinking about is that one of the very strong components that Eisenstein speaks about, quoting Dr. Kaplan, is this idea of folk ways and the like, which many of which used to be called mitzvot, commandments, and the like. But I would suggest that religion has many components, but the two The two components that I think are the basis of calling something a religion are practices and observance. That's one, and God. I think that's another, and I don't know where to put, one before the other. I don't think that's even important to talk about. But I do think that religion is broader based than God alone. Carol, I see your hand, and
Yeah, so I think that the kibbutz,
yes,
looking back into our heritage and in a way performing customs that they might have been brought up with and that were part of the social parts or the heritage parts of being a Jew. And then with you, what you were saying, Lee, I wonder if we were not a religious civilization, but if we were a civilization, if we would still be having the problems that we're having with other religions. Once we proclaim ourselves a religion, I don't know, what does that mean? And what does that mean to others?
and I think that issue is certainly raised by Ira in this book. That whole thing, and when we get to issues of chosenness in election and the like, which of course Kaplan rejected, I think one of the things that he was trying to do by rejecting this concept of election or chosenness was, just by saying we do not want to have a sense of primacy based on an attachment with our particular God, and we don't see religions as being competitive with one another and the like. I saw that Carol Kapper, and then I think Joan had something to say. Please. Let me just say, as Carol prepares, I can see that we are going to run over, that is, in terms of our internal schedule. We will not run over, not even 1 minute in terms of our time together tonight. But I would suggest that perhaps we try to extend this a bit, and we'll get back to looking into the book next time, to take a look at sentences and phrases as part of our closing experience. But Carol Kapper, please.
Well, one thing that I was surprised about, I didn't know that much about Kaplan compared to some other thinkers, religious thinkers, but I was surprised that he's such a functionalist and that he gathered his ideas from Durkheim. They were anthropological ideas. And it was surprising to me because because of one of the things, he sees religion, a functional view of religion is that it brings a group together, it's cohesive, it, in a sense, it keeps order. It's sort of a conservatizing view of religion as opposed to something more like Buber or something. But the thing is, what I find sort of surprising is when the focus is so much on the group, and then he talks about with that. That God is centered, and he has a few things that you have to have. You have to have sancta or some sacred kinds of objects, experiences, whatever, and you have to address God in the ceremony. And I was reading this from the folk aspect of Jewish religion,
which was page 119. And he says, and he gives it in this example of a piece of a poem from Lord Byron, where he says, well, and this is not Kaplan, I understand, this is Eisenstein, but he says, by way of example, he says that when he quotes Byron is using an ode form, so about, I don't even remember whether it was liberty or something, where you address it's just a literary device, which he treats more seriously than a literary device, and says, well, if Lord Byron can address this abstract concept in such a personal way, and it shows how much feeling he has, surely we can address this idea of God speaking in the second person. You have to speak he says that you have to speak in the second person. And yet I think of speaking in the second person as something more like Buber, and his view that you have to be in conversation with God, in a relationship with God. It just seems strange, because I don't see that much spirituality exactly in Kaplan, and yet he's so insistent on addressing God as in this second person voice, which is an intimate voice. So anyway, I just found that interesting and a little strange.
Well, I think that you're very right in saying what you said. I have this comment from page 118 where Eisenstein says, religion is the instrument by means of which the individual in the group is made to realize how important the group is to his life, or to their life, as it were. Belonging to the group has helped people to tame themselves and their appetites. It's very, very interesting. I think, and I get back to a story, and I don't know whether I told it here or I told it the last time Harriet and I did something for the SAJ on Ira. We once used this questionnaire to be a good Jew in our congregation, and decided to devote the second day of Rosh Hashanah to the discussion of it, a public discussion of it. And then in some leap, this was the time that the prayer book was just being formed, prayer book commission was just being formed. And we decided that, Joy and I decided that we would present two different positions on liturgical reform the second day, that I would petition for radical change, and she would petition for conservatism. And we put Avinu Malkeinu on trial, as it were. And, Avinu Malkeinu had always been problematic for me, and this dates back to 1985. And we decided that based on where people were at, it was the year of the mystery of Edwin Drood. Do you remember that? Where the audience got to vote on the ending and everything. So I actually had three different endings to the service. I had a something from the Adler Machzor, from an Orthodox Machzor. I had the way that we generally daven, which is from a Reconstructionist prayer book, but with with readings and with music and the like. And the third was a very radical ending with reformulated Hebrew. The Hebrew would be rewritten, and the rabbi would have absolutely nothing to do. People were choreographed to do it. And I had people line up on either side of the room That is, anyone who wanted to preserve the traditional Avinu Malkeinu were to, of course, my right, and anyone who wanted to radically reform it or jettison it were to my left. Okay, and we would have equal numbers of people speak for a period of time. That is, we were giving people 20 minutes to speak. And as I opened it up, this is a classical Kaplanian congregation, which had been Ira's synagogue. Ira, who was the rationalist par excellence. And I called for people to come forward, and there were 30 people lined up who did not want me to touch Avinu Malkeinu, and 2 people who were ready to radically reform it or jettison it. So, look, that was what it was. It's a Reconstructionist congregation. So we had 2 people speak. One person said, my husband will not come to services on Yom Kippur because of this Avinu Malkeinu thing. He didn't have a great relationship with his father. When you call God Father, he considers it to be irrational. The second guy, who is a psychoanalyst, a classically trained Freudian psychoanalyst, said, I did not grow up with this tradition. I don't know what this nostalgia is all about. Fair enough. 40 people on one side, 2 people on the other side. So then I called for a vote how we should end the service. Overwhelming majority wanted the most radical piece of literature. I blew up. The steam came out of my ears. Of course, only Joy saw it, fortunately. I turned to Joy and I said, they're yours. I cannot stand hypocrisy. I am leaving. And I left through the side aisle, and I'm in the entranceway of the building that we rented, waiting for someone, of course, to come out to find out if I was okay. No one came. And no one came because I had designed the service to absolutely have nothing to do with the rabbi. The cantor stood in the middle of the congregation and sang the Kaddish of Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev in Yiddish. And the entire thing went off without a glitch. And I am steaming. I am fuming. And no one gets it. So I go up to Woodstock and I see Ira. And I said, I can't believe this. That's your congregation. You told me to come here. What's this all about? And Ira listened to the story. And after I finished my rant, he said, well, you're an idiot. So what are you talking about? He said, you can't take Avinu Malkeinu away from people. Your premise was completely wrong. What are you talking about? They need once a year or twice a year to plug in to the God of their ancestors and also to remember the God in whom they no longer believe. Okay, I see 3 hands. I see Joan, I think, and then Jane, and then Bob.
First of all, Lee, I want you to know I have a similar story about Avinu Malkeinu from when I was a rabbinical student and went to Williams College to lead services there. It was still a novelty for many people for a woman to be a rabbi or a rabbinical student. So that was all, even at Williams College. But second of all, there was unknown to me a professor who was attending my service. I did the same thing with Avinu Malkeinu almost. And he stood up in a rant and condemned me, both as a woman for being there and for what happened with Avinu Malkeinu. I did something a little different. I divided it in so that people could hear it in English as well as in Hebrew, but our father, our king, our mother, our queen, and something more nondescript. And he was furious. So I said that anyone who wanted to could stay after service with, this was Yom Kippur, could stay after services with me and we would discuss it together. And that's what we did. Many students came and discussed it with me. Plus, a lot of them were his students who couldn't stand the man. And by the way, I knew who he was. And so I said, which probably wasn't the wisest thing to do as a rabbinical student, John, sit down. This is my service now. I won't do this in your classroom. This is my service. You can stay or you can leave. So he wrote to Rebecca Albert, all upset about me. And once she heard the story, I was fine. But I was petrified. Am I going to get kicked out of rabbinical school? But that isn't really what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say is that the wrestling that we're doing now and the wrestling that you did, to me, is Reconstructionism. And to me, that's what I loved when I learned about Reconstructionism. It's what I love about classical Reconstructionism. I'm using those words intentionally. It's why I was so attracted to this class. And so I want to thank you all. And I want to thank you, Lee, for doing this, and Harriet, because it's this kind of wrestling that I wanted. And I feel that I agree with Ira. What I've learned is that Avinu Malkeinu is important, Kol Nidre is important. People need to hear that, partly because of the music, of the sound. The music means something to people. And I'm a singer, a musician, in addition to being a rabbi. Music hits the soul somewhere that is not a matter of intellect as much as emotion. So I actually had something I was going to say, and now I can't remember what originally I was going to say. I think it was just basically one of the criticisms of Kaplan is the lack of spirituality. But at a time in my life when I was attracted to Kaplan, it was a very hard time for me. I'd lost my family. I was in my early 20s. And so I was wrestling with the issue of God. And so Reconstructionism allowed me to wrestle in a way that was okay, in a way that might not have been okay somewhere else. And so this wrestling attracted me very much to Reconstructionism. I was very grateful for it. So I think there is some truth in that. For some people, there's a feeling of a lack of spirituality that turns them off. But there are also those who feel lost, for whom the wrestling is important. And so it's the search. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks very much. I see Jane and Bob, and then I want to set the agenda for our next and last session. Thank you. Please.
Somewhere deep in my files is a short article written, I think probably for the Reconstructionist magazine, or Reconstructionism Today. I think that's the format, where he talks about prayer. And he says that there are two kinds of people come to a service for two different kinds of prayer. Some is the historical, what you grew up with, the Avinu Malkeinu, the music, the, what is familiar. And then the Amida is the time when it's your own prayer, and that's when it's most meaningful, when you are coming to terms yourself. But it's exactly what you've been saying. There is value in touching the traditional elements, even if you don't really believe it, but it has some resonance, and music is a very important part. I also am a musician, so.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the people who commented at that service said, "Look, okay, you want to get rid of the words? Promise me that we'll still be able to sing the melody." So I thought that was great. Bob, please.
Well, first, I sort of disagree with what Ira said, because I think some of the moments for some Reconstruction rabbis of truly Reconstruction synagogues that are the most important are the ones that feel the worst for the rabbis. So, I mean, my experience sometimes is like, they don't need me, they don't like me, they think I'm wrong, they have their own ideas, whatever. So the last time I visited Ira in Woodstock, Marcia Flock was there. And first off, Ira, I found that really interesting. And we were chatting, the three of us, for a while. And Ira said that if he had to do another liturgy, it would be Marcia's. And what he meant was that that the language would be all metaphor, it would be naturalistic, it would be experiential, it wouldn't use the word God, it you know, and all that. And what I remember him saying, and I think he wrote this in an article that not the same as you're describing, Jay, maybe a different article, where he talked about um, the place of like reciting the liturgy or singing the liturgy, and then something else that he referred to as passionate reflection. So when we were talking about this, what he said was, I asked him whether he like thought it was meaningful to recite the liturgy, and he said no, and that when he believed that one should retain some traditional liturgy, put quotation marks around it, to like, in the words of our ancestors, as they would have said or sung now, here we go. And that has nothing to do with anything that I'm feeling, thinking, aspiring to. I don't want to pray in that way. It's just a quotation for the sake of carrying on the tradition and for those who want to hear it. And when he said was that, then what follows is what actually matters to me, whether it's poetic or silent or musical or whatever. And I always thought it was really interesting that he really bifurcated that. Like he really didn't do what some of this generation following his started doing, which is trying to say, okay, so here's a prayer and we're going to read it as if it means blank and do a sort of a translation in a way that he didn't believe that. He said just the words just say the words, but they have nothing to do with prayer. And then there's something that's more amorphous and more poetic that is really an internal, which is not a word anybody would expect to hear from Ira, except that he said it a lot. Just nobody seemed to listen.
It's. I think that. I guess that the question that I want to leave you with before I pose the question that Harriet and I have for you to consider for next time, and this is something for you to think about. Can you have religion? Can you have when we talk about the forms of religion? Look, I have to tell you that I live alone. And I light candles on Friday night when I'm not in shul. That is that I'm home every other Friday night, and I am a severe rationalist. Although I would say my Jewish upbringing was on my adult was on indeed Martin Buber, but I'm a severe rationalist. I have to say that there's something that I find transformative, lighting candles. And I light them at home alone. I mean, it's not like I have the kids around. Sometimes we Zoom, sometimes we do Zoom, and I have to say that especially as I grow older, there are rituals that I perform that are very, very important to me. I do not think that they are commanded rituals. That is, I don't believe in God as the commander. But it reminds me, this is my favorite religious joke or joke having to do with religion. So what happens when you cross a Unitarian with a Seventh-day Adventist? Someone who knocks for no apparent reason. Is that not great? I just love that. It's my favorite joke, my favorite religious joke. So, so the thing is that is the practice or is the performance of religious ritual with a different view of God, sort of like the fulfillment of someone who puts on tefillin for no apparent reason. I stopped putting on tefillin a long time ago. That's not something that I picked up again, but it's very interesting. And I do want, with Harriet's permission, to devote some of our time next week to what Eisenstein says about God, and also at Harriet's very good suggestion to bring it into I guess the 1980s, and just read a little bit from what Harold Schulweis, who was a devotee of Kaplan's and of Ira's, how Harold translated that in a sense, or made it different. Look, the question, and again, Jeffrey isn't here to ask the question, but this is the question that Harriet comes back to at each of our discussions. So, but by next time, you will have read both books and perhaps gone back to your underlinings. We are interested in spending some of the time next time and having you do that. We're interested in what of this will carry our children and grandchildren into the next phase of religious civilization. In the section, I think it's right before the God section, or maybe right after, Ira talks about the three I guess, segments of Jewish evolution, the evolution in Jewish history to this point. Harriet and I are interested in what the point is beyond. And again, I translate this into, now that I'm in the grandfather business. So I know, and Richard said this at our first session, when we talked about what makes us Jewish or what we carry as a Jew. Richard spoke about the Holocaust. I speak about the Holocaust as a mid-century modern Jew, the Holocaust, and also the birth of Israel and the being of Israel until really 1973. What will do it for our children and grandchildren? What can we see of this creative program of Kaplan and Eisenstein's that will carry the continuity of Judaism into the 21st century? Harriet, do you want to add to that?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that interests me is I sometimes look at ritual well, which kind of defines some of what young rabbis and young students are thinking about now. And there's a whole lot of things addressed to spiritual life that almost never occurred to me in my coming of age Jewishly. And I wonder, is that one of the directions that Reconstructionism is going? Very different direction, I think, than until now. And I think I would like to explore a little bit also about what, as a college and as a movement, the directions that we're going.
I think that's a great idea. We'll send all of this to you in a letter, by the way. Please, we'll make it clear in the letter, which we hope to send out in a day or two. Sheridan, thank you so much for being here for us. That's really, really terrific. Welcome new members of this book group. And again, thanks for being such active and wonderful participants. It really means a lot to Harriet and to me to feel that we are participants in this group and not necessarily the leaders of. So thanks very much for being here.
Jane, did you get your question in? Will you send a link for the Schulweis book?
There's actually, I'll tell you, there is a great précis of his article that was published in the Reconstructionist, and I think it was in 1984. Oh, I bet I have the reference here. If you guys could read it, that would be terrific. And here it is. Yes, it's in June of 1984. It's entitled Predicate Theology. Don't be frightened by the title, please, because it's Predicate Theology, Feuerbach's Copernican Revolution. That's enough to turn anyone off. But it is a 3-page piece, and it's printed very clearly. So I don't know whether, and it's Harold.
Sheridan, why don't you see if you can find, or Lee, send the link to Sheridan and she can distribute it to everybody.
I wouldn't know how to send a link to anyone.
Take a picture, take a photograph of it and send. No, who can do that? Bob, you could do that.
If you send me the.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Harry.
Yes, I'll find it. I'll send it to you. Okay.
Thank you. Send it to everybody.
Bob, our relationship never changes. You know, like
it never does. and thank goodness.
Everyone be well and keep cool. Keep warm.
Be well. And
wait, you said keep calm. I think you're right.
But we need, or tomorrow we'll find out what's what a little more. Not that there'll be too many surprises, but I'll see you later, guys. I'll see.
Thank you so much for this,
Harriet. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Harriet. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Did you guys want to hang out a little bit more? Oh, I guess not. Okay. Rabbi Friedlander, he left. Have a good night, Harriet.
Right, you too, and thank you very